second referendum is an insult to the office he once held and the people he once served. Well, our political correspondent Nick Eardley has been telling us that increasing numbers of people are talking about the prospect of another referendum.
6 months ago, if we'd been speaking about it, it would have seemed like quite an unlikely prospect, but more and more at Westminster, people are talking about it as a potential way to end some of the impasse we've seen in recent weeks. The problem for Theresa May is that Tony Blair certainly isn't the only one who's advocating another referendum. Another former Prime Minister, John Major, a Conservative Prime Minister at that, is part of that camp as well, and so are an increasing number of MPs, including some in Theresa May's own party. I think what she's trying to do this morning in some ways is almost lance the boil of conversation about this, saying, to take some of her quotes, that some are seeking to subvert the process for their own political interest, not acting in the national interest, accusing Mr Blair of undermining negotiations by seeking to have talks in Brussels about potential ways to prepare for another referendum. But as I say, Theresa May can't simply say this is my political opponents from yesteryear who are doing that, because there are many in Parliament who believe the same thing.
That was Nick Eardley, our political correspondent. We can talk now to Ben Bradshaw, the Labour MP. He's one of a group of MPs who has met the Cabinet Minister David Lidington this week to discuss the possibility of another referendum. Thanks for being with us, Ben. Mr Bradshaw, is that right that you've been talking to David Lidington about another referendum?
Well, I'm not going to talk about the details of that meeting, Ben. It was a private meeting. It wasn't the first one that we had, as some of the reports of it in the Sunday Times today are not really strictly accurate. But we thought it was very important that the government at the highest level know that this deal is not going to go through, that they understand the depth and severity of this crisis. They get on with bringing the deal back to Parliament next week and get it voted on so that we can then move on to the next stage. We also wanted to make sure that the government didn't think that there were enough votes on the Labour benches to get through this kind of Norway-type halfway house Brexit, and that it really did need to move quickly to end the uncertainty that's doing so much damage to our economy.
So you think there are enough MPs who would support the idea of another referendum, do you?
I'm confident that once this deal is out of the way, once the idea of a general election, which of course I would like to see, but I think is unlikely because of the Fixed-Term Parliament Act, once that is off the agenda as well, then I think, yes, when we're facing the choice, which it will be, between the disaster of crashing out over the cliff with no deal and another referendum, I think that will be the only option or solution that will command a Commons majority.
What would you say to all the people who may be screaming at their TV now, saying we've already had a referendum, we've had a people's vote, and the answer was leave, get out of Europe, just get on with it?
Well, I would ask them what their answer would be to getting us out of this gridlock. And I think it's very important that people focus on what crashing out over a cliff with without a deal would mean. There are some people who seem to think that it means the status quo. So it's really important that people focus on the detail of what that would mean. It would be absolutely catastrophic for our economy, and I think there'd be many other serious repercussions as well.
When anyway, you say it would be catastrophic, a lot of Leave campaigners would say that is Project Fear. You're absolutely exaggerating the difficulties of a no-deal Brexit.
Well, it's the government's own assessment of what would happen in those circumstances. And anyway, there's no way Parliament would ever allow it to happen. 80–90% of MPs understand how catastrophic it would be. So if the government itself doesn't take no deal off the table, I think Parliament will for it. And democracy does not stand still at one point in time, Ben. And I think the Brexit that we have now before us in Theresa May's deal is very, very different from the Brexit that was sold to the voters 2.5 years ago, including to many of those voters who voted Leave, who don't like her deal. So her deal is dead, and we've got to find some way as a country of moving forward.
Do you sense then that Parliament is beginning to try to take control in this whole issue of where we move forward in Brexit, and that Labour MPs are going to talk to Tory MPs and other MPs from other parties to try and get some sort of consensus?
Well, I think it's the responsibility of all members of Parliament to show that responsibility at this moment of unprecedented crisis. This is the worst crisis this country has ever experienced in peacetime. The government is in complete meltdown. I mean, look at what different cabinet ministers are saying today. Some want another referendum, some want a Norway-type solution, some want a no-deal, crash-out Brexit. And there's no majority at the moment for any of those things. So somehow, Parliament, which is our sovereign decision-making body in our democracy, has to find a way through this for the sake of our country and the future of our people.
But the Prime Minister has made it very, very clear she hates the idea of another referendum. She's been very angry with Tony Blair today, saying he's insulting the office of Prime Minister by going around even talking about another referendum. So she's not going to make it happen, is she?
Well, the Prime Minister has said many things, and then she's done something different. You may remember last year's election. You may remember she was going to have the vote last week until the last minute. Now, I did find her outburst against Tony Blair slightly extraordinary. I think it shows a sign of desperation. Your own correspondent a moment or two ago pointed out that all surviving Prime Ministers of the United Kingdom think now that another referendum is the only way out of this mess, including the former Conservative Prime Minister John Major. So I think to single out Tony Blair was uncharacteristic of the Prime Minister. Look, we need to find a way out of this. Everybody does. Everybody who cares about our country and is responsible for the repercussions of what would happen if we don't find a way out. And I think that responsibility lies very heavily on every single individual MP, and they should step up to it.
Ben Bradshaw, Labour MP, thank you very much for being with us here on BBC News this morning. Thank you. Negotiators at the United Nations Climate Conference in Poland have finally agreed a deal on measures to tackle climate change. Nearly 200 countries overcame political divisions to set out how they should implement the promises they've made in the Paris Agreement of 3 years ago to cut greenhouse gas emissions and minimise global warming. Here's our science editor, David Shukman.
This is what it's all about. Gases released into the air that heat the planet. And after some long, difficult arguments, the world has inched towards a deal for how to reduce them, to try to avoid the risks of dangerous levels of warming in future. The talks at Katowice in Poland saw delegates from nearly 200 countries haggling over rules for how to tackle climate change. A slow process, but eventually a deal was done.
It will move us one major step towards realizing the ambition enshrined in the Paris Agreement. An ambition that will ensure that our children and their children look back at our legacy and recognize that their parents and grandparents took the right decisions.
He was urged to take a bow, but there are questions about what's actually been achieved. The big challenge is that many countries, including Poland, rely on highly polluting fuels like coal. Thousands of jobs depend on them. Some campaigners say a few governments drag their feet, but others are pleased to have got this far.
We've seen countries come together, they've responded to the science, they haven't done enough, but they have done what's possible here. They've lent in, they've agreed some rules, and they've set themselves a job to go home and do more and work out what they're going to do, engaging with their citizens, their businesses, their investors to say, how can we take more climate action?
The hope is for a transition to cleaner forms of energy like solar power. The deal in Poland may encourage that. The world is responding to global warming, but not nearly with the speed that scientists say is needed. David Shukman, BBC News.
Well, our environment correspondent Matt McGrath was at that conference in Poland and has been giving us his assessment of the talks.
Negotiators went down to the wire, really, on trying to get the operational rule book for the Paris Agreement agreed here amongst all the countries. There are some big last-minute hitches, some big arguments about carbon markets. One country in particular, Brazil, picked a big fight about that, but eventually compromise language was found, and as you say, much to the relief of many of the people in here, the text was agreed and accepted by all parties. A key element of this rule book is the idea of transparency, that all countries will be operating with one set of rules in the future. The way that they report and measure their carbon should be on the same sort of set of documents from every country. That's a key element ensuring and building trust amongst countries, so that everyone knows what everybody else is doing and they can see it as well. So that's a key element of that. The other element, of course, is the idea that every country should increase their ambitions to cut carbon by 2020. Now, that mightn't be as high hard or as tough as many people would want here, and indeed some people are critical of it, that the deal is a bit too soft. But I think people who are the practical people here, the negotiators feel, look, we came here to get a deal, we had 2 tough weeks, we've got a deal, and it's an important step forward for the Paris Climate Agreement.
Matt McGrath there, our environment correspondent at that climate conference in Katowice in Poland. Chester Zoo has launched a £50,000 fundraising campaign after fire destroyed much of the vast roof covering its monsoon forest area. The area was quickly evacuated, but some animals are still missing, and the zoo will reopen later today. Adam Woods reports.
The UK's largest zoo enclosure engulfed in flames.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Inside, hundreds of rare and exotic creatures. Firefighters were quick to arrive. As the zoo was evacuated, staff went back in to move animals to safety.
And what could you see?
Just loads of smoke over like the new part of the zoo, and it was just like really clouded, and there seemed to be like a lot of panic, a lot of fire engines, police, even ambulance.
15 fire crews battled strong wind and rain to bring the flames under control. One person had to be treated for the effects of smoke inhalation. No other injuries have been reported. All mammals living inside the enclosure, including endangered orangutans, gibbons and crocodiles, have been accounted for. But many tropical birds remain missing. An investigation into what caused the fire is now underway, with parts of the zoo expected to reopen later today. Adam Woods, BBC News.
Drivers in Scotland are being advised to take extra care after a number of crashes on the M74 in Dumfries and Galloway. It's thought freezing rain may have covered parts of the motorway. And meanwhile, Storm Deirdre has brought flooding and left thousands of homes and businesses without electricity in parts of Ireland. The Met Office says the worst of the weather has now passed, but warned of continuing icy conditions. And bad weather and an increasing trend to buy things online are both being blamed for shoppers staying away from the high street on what is usually the busiest weekend before Christmas. Retail experts say that footfall across the UK yesterday was down almost 10% compared with the same time last year. It comes after a November which has been described by some businesses as unbelievably bad. Joe Miller reports.
It's been a year of profit warnings, branch closures and big brands going under. Britain's retailers have had a torrid 2018.
We've seen consumer confidence drop, we've seen costs increase, and in general I think people are very nervous about spending. I don't imagine this is going to let up anytime soon.
Amid the gloom, styling himself as the saviour of the high street, Mike Ashley's Sports Direct, which rests on House of Fraser, says it wants to lend a hand to a wounded competitor, Debenhams.
We've put this offer in to invest another 40 million, and it really is kind of the electric shock to wake them up to what is probably the last chance saloon.
Mike Ashley has suggested that Debenhams has zero chance of survival without his cash, but the chain has rebuffed his proposal, and some suspect the billionaire, who is already Debenhams' largest shareholder, wants to get his hands on its assets if it collapses, a claim Sports Direct denies. For now, Debenhams and other struggling chains might just be able to afford to keep Mike Ashley at bay, but neither they nor Mike Ashley's retail empire can afford a disappointing Christmas. Joe Miller, BBC News.
Now, our latest headlines here on BBC News. And Theresa May has accused the former Prime Minister Tony Blair of insulting the office he once held by supporting another EU referendum. After 2 weeks of negotiations, delegates at the UN Climate Conference in Poland reach agreement on how to enforce promised cuts to carbon emissions. Chester Zoo is launching a £50,000 fundraising campaign after fire destroyed much of the vast roof covering one of its enclosures yesterday. All the latest sport for you now. Big game in the Premier League, Liverpool Man United. I'm going to be watching that one. Catherine Downs has got the latest.
It always is, isn't it, Ben? One of the biggest rivalries in English football. Manchester United travelling to Anfield to face Liverpool later. United go into this match in sixth. That's 16 points behind their bitter rivals, while Jurgen Klopp's side are looking to go back to the top of the table.
We never thought before a game, only because we have a few good results in the past at home or whatever, that it will be easy in the next game. That's not the mood you can win football games in. We have to be angry on Sunday, and we will be. We fight for our points. It's not that there's anything, we don't sort problems for others or whatever. We have our own problems, we have our own targets, and we go for them. That's all.
We know that we are going to play against the leader. We are going to play against a team in a high, and even with the problems we have, and we have doubts about everything because we don't know which players are available, but we are going to arrive. We are going to have a team capable of going there and fight for the victory.
In the earlier kick-offs today, 2 London clubs heading to the south coast, with Brighton hosting Chelsea and Arsenal travelling to Southampton. Celtic and Rangers are both hoping to finish the day at the top of the Scottish Premier League. A 3-1 win over Dundee yesterday put Kilmarnock a point clear of Celtic. But the Scottish champions have 3 games in hand, starting away at Hibernian this lunchtime. Should they lose, though, a win for Rangers over Hamilton would see them go top. And Liverpool ladies will be hoping to make up for their league defeat to local rivals Everton earlier this month with a win in the Women's Continental Cup today. The tie, postponed earlier this month because of a waterlogged pitch at Prenton Park, is due to kick off at 12 o'clock. That's the Continental Cup. Justin Rose needed to finish in the top 12 of the Indonesian Masters to finish the year as the world's #1 golfer, but he had a bit of a nightmare during his final round. He started the day tied in 4th place. In the end, it all came down to this on the final putt at 18. He needed an eagle for the top spot in the rankings, but it wasn't to be, so Justin Rose finished on his worst. Brooks Koepka finishes 2018 as world #1. In boxing, Katie Taylor produced a dominant display in New York to beat Eva Wallström and successfully defend her IBF and WBA world lightweight titles. Meanwhile, Canelo Alvarez now can say that he is world champion in 3 weight divisions. That's after he beat Liverpool's Rocky Fielding at Madison Square Gardens earlier this morning. Fielding was knocked down 4 times before the fight was stopped in the 3rd round.
I never shied away from the challenge. The phone call I got was Canelo wanted to fight you, so I said yeah, Madison Square Garden, and it's been a great week. Met some great people. You know, I dare to be great. I lived the dream, but you know, I'll come again. I'll come back.
Olympic bronze medalist Bianca Walkden successfully defended her title at the Taekwondo World Grand Slam. The 2-time world champion says she'll spend her prize money on buying another pizzeria, while Lauren Williams, who also won gold in her weight division earlier, will pay off her parents' mortgage. In just under an hour's time, England's hockey players will face Australia for the bronze medal at the Men's World Cup. It's after they were soundly beaten 6-0 by Belgium in yesterday's semi-final. The Belgians go on to play the Netherlands for gold. And that's all the sport for now. You can find out more on those stories, including that bronze medal match at the Men's World Cup. Follow it live on the BBC Sport website. That's bbc.co.uk/sport. And I'll be back with more for you in the next hour. See you then, Ben.
See you then, Kat. Cheers. Thank you very much indeed. Now let's talk about Strictly, because last night was the final, of course, and our arts correspondent David Sillito has got all the details for you.
It's the final!
The Strictly final. 4 couples, 3 dances, and from the very beginning, it was Ashley Roberts, the former Pussycat Doll, who set the standard. The big lift from Dirty Dancing was flawless.
10.
The score, perfect 10s. And those 40s kept coming. This athletic show dance on a raised and revolving platform.
I personally, as a dancer, feel that you've stretched yourself beyond limits. You've learned techniques that you were not familiar with ever before. You have brought to this show a life, a style, and I truly am grateful to you.
Of course, Craig did try to find a fault.
I had a small problem with your right toe, darling. But then I decided to get over myself. Oh well, 10!
Not a point was dropped all night. But matching those scores, dance after dance, was Faye Tozer.
Come on along and listen to the lullaby.
This Hollywood glitz in high heels on a very high top hat. And at the end of this routine to fever, it was perfect tens across the board.
What an end of a journey. Wow.
Wow, this is really high. But when it comes to a journey to go from being a non-dancer to doing this, YouTuber Joe Sugg was more than holding his own. Ending with a Charleston.
You are the biggest surprise of this series. I mean, from a marathon night of dances tonight, you have just got stronger and stronger. And it's an extraordinary amount of work that you have put in, and it has paid off. You are a star on this dance floor.
For TV journalist Stacey Dooley, it began with a foxtrot. And then an explosive show dance. Everything was thrown at it. The crowd... Bruno tried to describe it as her greatest hits. But Craig...
I wasn't that keen on the dance. I'm only being honest.
It was the lowest score of the night. And even at the end of a Paso Doble described as having power and passion, she was in 4th place. But this isn't up to the judges. All that matters is what the public thinks. And they saw it rather differently.
Stacey
And even more emotional was her professional dance partner, Kevin Clifton. After 5 finals, his first Strictly victory. Of this year's Glitterball trophy, Stacey Dooley. David Sillito, BBC News.
Well, congratulations to Stacey and Kevin. Let's talk now to the astrologer Russell Grant, who you may well remember took part in Strictly back in 2011. Russell, thanks very much indeed for being with us. What did you make of Stacey winning?
Well, I'm absolutely thrilled. As I said with Zoe Ball a couple of weeks ago, I didn't know who Joe was and I didn't know who Stacey was, but now I know them both. It's opened up a new career for me to spot young people who are doing so well in their genre, and now they've come into terrestrial television and they are just setting the screen on fire. I was so thrilled to see Stacey and Joe, and also Lauren with AJ doing so well.
Because some people have said that the celebrities, you know, aren't famous enough, aren't big enough stars.
Well, you've got to grow, haven't you? I mean, my background was musical theatre when I did it, but I was 60 years old and I was 30 stone and lost 10 stone before I did Strictly. And so people would only know me in the stargazing area. And I think the whole point about Strictly is to get to know people. And with Lauren and with Joe and with Stacey, you've seen another side of them. They have evolved. In areas that probably they would never have thought that they would become famous for. And now the world's their oyster.
And there's been a little bit of chat about how the fact that some of the contestants are obviously trained dancers, even though they're celebrities, and others like Stacey aren't. And in a way, perhaps the public prefer those who, well, like yourself really, no background at all in dance.
Well, the point is technique and competence on the dance floor. They're going to look at the steps. And so therefore they're always going to mark up those who have perhaps some kind of background or some kind of past in dance. But Shadi also summed it up. I mean, I was in musical theatre. I appeared in the West End before astrology took over for BBC Breakfast Time in the 1980s. But I never did that kind of dance before. I mean, when I was at Flavia, I'd never certainly done Paso Dobles, and then to appear 6 weeks with Vincent and Flavia doing an Argentine tango, who would have thought it? But in the end, the public kept people like myself in, And they did the same last night. In the end, it's the joy that somebody like Stacey brought last night, and Kevin's wonderful storytelling. Look at the Charleston the week before. Look at the show dance last night. In the for me, it was Flavia's very clever way of bringing out performance and my rhythm, my natural rhythm, and Kevin did the same with Stacey. And she lit up the screens, her show dance was full of pizzazz, and people want entertainment. That's why it's an entertainment show.
And just going back to when you were on the show, Russell, of course, you gave the people entertainment, didn't you? I think we're going to look at a few pictures now of you on the show. This was you being fired out of that cannon. I mean, not exactly dancing, but tell us, how did it change your life being on Strictly?
But it was entertainment, you see. That's the thing, Ben. And when I landed, I still had to do a jive. And we became BAFTA nominated for TV Highlight of the Year. We got beaten by a royal wedding that year, would you believe? And it's about the entertainment, and there's been plenty of that. And a lot of people now know, a lot of people who have been in social media, who have millions of followers, and now they've got a whole new band, a whole new generation of followers. Perhaps older people like myself, and equally on Strictly, I got a lot of younger people following me.
And it's hard work, isn't it? I mean, doing all that training, people think, you know, the transformation in a way of someone like yourself to a, well, more than adequate dancer, it does require hard work, doesn't it, in the practice room?
Goodness me. I mean, I live in Snowdonia, so Flavia and I had to travel up from London and back down from Snowdonia to London. We lost a day's rehearsal, and every second counts when you're dancing. You've got to have the stamina, you've got to have the joy. You see, one of the important things, Ben, is to have a partner that you gel with. I had Flavia in the main show, I had Joanne Clifton, Kevin's sister, in the Christmas show, and if you gel with your partner, then you can fire your rocket to the moon, no matter where you are. Doesn't have to be Wembley.
A rocket to the moon, I love it. OK, Russell, thank you so much. Good to talk to you, Russell Grant there. Strictly contestant, of course, in 2011. All right, let's get a look at the weather now. Helen Willetts has got that for us this morning.
Hello. This is a picture taken through the early hours of this morning, showing the snow still falling in parts of Scotland, but the wintry weather and Storm Deirdre are blowing away now out into the North Sea. The gales are abating for the Northern Isles. We've got lots of sunshine first thing and a scattering of showers, but the showers become more prevalent across southern and western parts of England into the afternoon, across Wales, western England and up into southern Scotland. But elsewhere, good spells of sunshine continuing, and even ahead of the showers, there'll be some good spells of sunshine too. And it's milder, 7 to 10 degrees Celsius on the whole, certainly up on the temperature yesterday. Without the wind, it doesn't feel so icy. There will be some rain, though, pushing its way eastwards through this evening before it clears. Overnight, it becomes quite chilly, actually. These are town and city temperatures. In the countryside, they'll be lower. So there will be a frost come morning. 1 or 2 icy patches and potentially some mist and fog, actually, as we go into the new working week. But otherwise, a fairly decent start to the week. More wind and rain, though, is on the way for most of us on Tuesday.
Hello again, you're watching BBC News with me, Ben Brown. Our latest headlines. Theresa May accuses the former Prime Minister Tony Blair of insulting the office he once held by supporting another EU referendum. After 2 weeks of negotiations, delegates at the UN Climate Conference in Poland reach agreement on how to enforce promised cuts to carbon emissions. Chester Zoo launches a £50,000 fundraising campaign after fire destroyed much of the vast roof covering one of its enclosures yesterday. Well, now on BBC News, a special programme. We're looking back at the commemorations throughout the year of the Armistice Centenary.
Last month, Europe marked the end of a terrible conflict. The First World War cost millions of lives and ruined millions more. A century on from the armistice, this generation paused to remember tragedies, both global and personal.
just cannot believe what man can do to man.
I mean, I'm known in the village as Poppy Lady now.
This is the Imperial War Museum in London. Today, along with its sister site in the UK, it reflects world conflict across the generations. The museum was founded back in 1917 to tell the story of the First World War. Last month, the Duchess of Cambridge was here to see a cascade of poppies marking British and Commonwealth lives lost. Around Britain, the centenary of the armistice brought thousands more events in cities, towns, villages, and even on our beaches. The film director Danny Boyle, who masterminded the 2012 Olympic opening ceremony in London, led an initiative to create sand portraits of soldiers lost on the battlefields. Sean Peel from BBC Look East watched one project unfolding at Brancaster in Norfolk.
A crisp autumn afternoon on Brancaster Beach, tide out, bright sunshine lighting the scene as families and walkers enjoyed just being together, a perfect Sunday to remember those no longer here. With the wet sand providing a canvas, work began to create a portrait of a man who died in the Great War, there and gone like the tide, never to return to these shores. They're creating an image of driver Stephen Hewitt. He was born in Halvergate in Norfolk and died in 1916, aged 37.
Well, luckily sand is quite flexible, so you can always sort of cover over a little bit if it's not working. But yeah, we wanted to be careful. We worked in pairs to keep checking that we were doing it right, and I think we're really pleased with the end result.
Stephen Hewitt was a driver in the field artillery looking after the horses used to take the guns into battle. He was fighting the Bulgarians in Greece, but one day out riding he was attacked by a pack of wolves and died of his injuries. For Amelia Ord, it was an emotional day. Stephen Hewitt was her great-granddad. She only heard this was happening days before, a chance glance at a piece in a newspaper, so she drove here from Newcastle.
Very emotional. I've cried all the way down on the journey today. I always find remembering Sunday emotional, and I think it's because I do, I'm interested in our family history, and today, much more. So we made sure we stopped at 11 o'clock to do a 2 minutes, silence, and it's been tugging at the heartstrings all morning. We'll be here till it's dark.
The centuries' tides, chanting their bitter psalms, cannot heal it. Not the war to end all wars, death's birthing place.
As the light faded, a poem was recited, Pages of the Sea by the poet laureate Carol Ann Duffy.
History might as well be water, chastising this shore, for we learn nothing from your endless sacrifice.
At the going down of the day at Brancaster, those who came to remember left before nightfall, leaving the incoming tide to take driver Stephen Hewitt into its arms.
The armistice commemorations have centred on lives lost in combat. But as Jerry Jackson from BBC Look North discovered, among the graves of those killed during 4 years of bloodshed are others of men who died after the fighting stopped.
Our First World War dead lie in hundreds of Commonwealth war cemeteries on the battlefields of Europe, the Middle East and Africa. But more than 130,000 of them died in the UK. This is Sunderland. As the leaves fell in 1918, many relatives must have thought their loved ones had made it through the worst. Private Robert Reevely is wounded in France in mid-October and is invalided back to a hospital in the Midlands, where he dies on the 10th of November. It's almost certain that his wife Kate in Roker would have received the telegram on Armistice Day, perhaps as the church bells were ringing and people were in the streets celebrating. On the 12th, she writes to his regiment asking for the return of his personal belongings. She says, "I shall be very grateful if you will oblige me in this matter.
It may seem a small thing to ask for, but it means a lot to me.
Andrew Neil had been blinded in the war. He died 6 months after the armistice and should have had a military headstone. For nearly a century, he lay in an unmarked grave.
The problem was that his death certificate said Jacksonian epilepsy, but it wasn't attributing that to war injuries. If we knew that he died as a result of the Great War, then sometime later we got his pension disability card.
And this is it.
And this is it. Same cause of death, but in small letters, due to active service. You know, the man gave his eyes and his life for his country, and now he's got something back to recognise that.
My mum and my aunties just said my granddad was blind in the First World War. Never knew anything else. To see the stone now, and especially when you drive up the road and it gleams, it's just fantastic.
Sergeant Neil's story is one of many researched by the Northumbria World War I Commemoration Project, a 7-year community volunteer remembrance endeavour. John Ewell from County Durham had won the Victoria Cross in the Italian Alps in the summer of 1918. He was killed 4 days before